Hey everybody, CVH here, and in today's video we'll be doing a metagame discussion video of my stats to legend in the February season on the ladder. If you guys don't know, I've been tracking my stats pretty religiously since the beginning of the January season, and after hitting legend on day 4 in January, I did an article on betweenthelane.net, my website, CVH's Stats to Legend January edition, where I break down what I was playing, what my opponents were playing, and analyze some of those statistics. And I hit legend on day 4 again in this season, and while I was preparing to write the February edition of the article, I thought, hey, might as well try this in a different medium and post a YouTube video instead of an article, see if the YouTube audience takes to this, see if you guys enjoy hearing me talk about it in this format as opposed to an article. So what I've done here is, well, first let's talk about the grind a bit. Like I said, it ended in 4 days, just like the January season, from rank 5 non-legend to legend. There were 116 games tracked this month as opposed to 120 the previous month, and while there were 4 less games this month, there were the same amount of wins, oddly enough. So I guess I spent less time in the Serpent in February, so that slight bit of improvement in win rate is definitely nice to see. But what I've done here, as you can see on screen, is I've looked through the entire Google Sheet. If I moved over to the left, you could see all the different games specifically tracked based on the day and which deck I was playing. But the statistics I want to talk about in this video are what I was playing against, the frequency of different decks on the ladder. So without counting the decks that I was playing, obviously, I searched the document and searched for the instance of every specific class, and then broke it down further into the type of deck within those classes that I played against. So here are the basic stats. 21% of all my opponents were using Battle Mage for a total of 24 players. I'll just go over the percentages. You can see the actual number next to them. 18% of all my opponents were Sorcerer, 17% were 20 of them were Archer, 17%. I guess I should just say the number instead of the percent now that I'm thinking about it. 14 opponents had Spell Sword, 10 had Scout, 7 had Mage, 7 had Assassin, 4 had Crusader, 4 had Warrior, 3 had Monk, and 2 of my opponents were playing monocolored decks, 1 red Strength and 1 blue Intelligence. So the most popular decks were, I highlighted these 3 in sort of a little different highlight color. Aggro Battle Mage had 15 people playing it, Item Sorcerer had 13 people playing it, and Control Spellsword had 13 people playing it. Dragging behind slightly were decks like Merrick Battle Mage, the mid-range version of Sorcerer, Aggro Archer, mid-range Archer, Ram Scout. Well, that wasn't a deck, that was just a class, and some Control Mage had 6 people playing it, so there was a few that were dragging behind slightly. Nothing too out of the ordinary there. So the decks that people tend to think are most overpowered in the meta are Battle Mage and Sorcerer. Those are the classes that really stick out. And the thing about that is, Aggro Battle Mage has been in the meta for a long time, and Merrick Battle Mage has been in the meta for a long time. So Battle Mage, it's unsurprising that if any deck was going to surpass Sorcerer in popularity, it would be Battle Mage, because there are 2 pretty different versions of Battle Mage that have both been near tier 1, if not tier 1, for a few months now. So having 2 very playable decks at the top of the ladder, that does a lot for the class in general. Sorcerer is kind of there. It has Item Sorcerer and the mid-range Tempo Sorcerer with the Black Robe Necromancers and the Royal Sages. This has been played for a while as well. It's not super different from the Item Sorcerer deck in the way it functions. A lot of the cards are staple, and the way it tries to close the game is pretty similar. The difference between Aggro and Merrick Battle Mage is more stark than the difference between Item and mid-range Sorcerer. And as we can see on these statistics, the mid-range Tempo Sorcerer variants have sort of fallen out of favor to the Item Gardener of Swords, Master of Arms decks as of late. Archer was a bit of a surprise, not particularly to see among the highest amount of the classes, because it is a very good deck and a very good class, and with mid-range Archer being a very good deck a few months back especially. But I think what really helped this class was, ironically, the rise in Sorcerer. And yeah, because while mid-range Archer isn't particularly great against the mid-range versions of Sorcerer, because Sorcerer typically just has better quality of cards, the rise in Aggro Archer, thanks to Scissor playing it, and I guess I played it a bit too, the Aggro Token Archer and the other variants of it with Orcs or the tokens or hybrid of the 2, Aggro Archer performs very well against Sorcerer. So the more Sorcerers you see, the more Aggro Archers I've personally seen on the ladder. And as we can see here, Aggro Archer did slightly outperform mid-range Archer. And there are even other types of Archer that are being experimented with. We saw a little bit of Control Archer, Swindler's Market Archer, and Rothgar Forge Archer is still a deck that some people do play on the ladder. I didn't queue against it in my particular grind, but it's not a deck that I would totally write off by any means. So Archer does benefit from having a bunch of different decks, even though unlike Battle Mage, Sorcerer, and Spell Sword, one isn't far and away the more popular of the bunch. Spell Sword, it's pretty clear that almost everyone playing Spell Sword is Control, and this does in fact make it the most played Control deck on the ladder, whether or not you consider Ramp Scout a control deck, both Ramp Scout and Control Mage were falling slightly behind Control Spellsword from my statistics, and that makes sense. I think it's probably the most powerful, well-rounded control deck at the moment, and again, it does benefit from the rise in Sorcerers, even though Spellsword does not do well against Supreme Atromancer at all, in any stretch of the imagination, even worse than Mage, because Mage has, Ice Storm and Odoving and stuff like that. Spellsword has very limited answers to that, but it does have 3 executes and very powerful early game and very powerful late game tools as well, so if it goes into the late game against other control decks, unless Supreme Atromancer is being played on it, it'll use its Blood Magic Lords, its Mana Chorus to get pretty far ahead of the opponent. So Spellsword control, probably one of the more well-positioned control decks at the moment, very good at punishing those super fast aggro decks, very dedicated aggro decks like Aggro Battle Mage and Aggro Archer as well. Control Mage, I didn't break this down further, I kind of wish I had, because there are kind of a couple of different ways to play Control Mage at the moment. I think the Prophecy-heavy version is much better against a lot of the aggro decks, but if when you focus less on the Prophecies, you'll have much better game against some of the later game-oriented decks. So I didn't break down further into which type of control deck there were, but there were only 6 Control Mages that I faced on the rank 5 to Legend grind. So with that being said, we've kind of already talked about Scout as well. Some ramp, a little bit of mid-range. We've basically seen this kind of split from Scout since the beginning of time, basically, so not too surprising there that ramp would be more popular. Assassin was kind of interesting. We saw a couple Mastermind Assassins, a couple Item Assassins, which did fall out of favor, pretty hardcore in the face of Item Sorcerer. A little bit of Swindler's Assassin. I think Swindler's Market Assassin is pretty unexplored, and a pretty powerful deck when it gets rolling, so I expect to see more of that in the future. No Altar Assassins. I'm pretty sure all of the Mastermind Assassins I played against were just aggressive decks that didn't use Altar. And to that end, I think I only played against maybe one Altar deck in the entire grind, the one Altar Monk deck, and these 2 control decks, I'm pretty sure they were not playing Altar of Despair. At the very least, I didn't see any reason they would be, and they didn't play them against me either. A couple Rising decks besides that. Midrange Crusader saw a bit of play thanks to the new 6-drop 7/7. Both of those decks, I believe, were playing that card. A little bit of control as well. But another Rising deck I want to talk about is the Token Control Warrior, which some people, I think there was a Reddit post, someone took it to Legend top 10 at the end of last season, uses Doomcrag Vampire, the token generators like Raiding Party and Mark Hearth that are in so many of those decks, a lot of ways to deal 1 damage, and it can generate pretty obscene amounts of removal out of nowhere thanks to Doomcrag Vampire, and some pretty substantial threats as well. I don't know the matchups to that deck well at all, but it is a deck to watch out for, and it gave me some pretty hard times on the ladder as well. Monocolored decks, I think these are mostly just a meme, but it was pretty cool to queue against 2 of them. For a total of more than 1% of my matches were against monocolored decks, which is, it's funny. Funnily enough, you don't really get to say that a whole lot of the time, so pretty glad I queued against them. So what does this really mean? We're not surprised to see Battle Mage and Sorcerer at the top of the ladder. A lot of people would probably expect to see Sorcerer at the highest percentage. I would say Battle Mage is more likely because of the 2 different decks that you have in Aggro and Merrick Battle Mage, how different they are, but how competitive they both are. A lot of the time it does feel like Item and Midrange are sort of the same, or very similar decks to the point where you feel like you're queuing against it all at the same time. So if you add both of these up to the same deck, yes, they're the more popular deck. If this is one deck, that one deck is more popular than this and this. However, as a class, I expect to see slightly less Sorcerer than Battle Mage as long as both these decks are very good. Aggro Battle Mage has fallen off a little bit recently, I guess thanks to the rise of some of these control decks, but I expect to see it in the meta for a good amount of time to come. I think Archer might settle down a bit once people settle on a particular version of the deck. Ramp Scout, I guess I continue to see it falling a little bit since the rise of other control decks like Mage and Spellsword, now that Hissgrove isn't quite as busted. And Ramp Scout is another one of those decks that doesn't really have good answers to Supreme Atromancer. The lesser played decks, though, between Battle Mage, Sorcerer, and Archer, I believe it's 56% of all the decks I played against. So I was more likely to queue into one of these 3 classes than anything else combined. I'm not really sure if that's crazy or not. I remember it being a bit more of an even spread in the January stats, even though I don't have the specific stats right in front of me. But it does seem a little bit spread out as far as there are 3 decks that are 3 classes that are very, very popular, and quite a few at the bottom. Not so much Spellsword and Scout, which are pretty, they're decent percentages, of course. But Mage, Assassin, and Mage and Assassin are like on the low end of what you'd expect, but Crusader, Warrior, and Monk are very, very unpopular right now. And I think no one would be surprised to see that. I'm a little surprised I saw that much Assassin. I would say these 4 are the weakest at the moment. What needs to happen, it just remains to be seen. The Token Warrior was kind of a variance in its favor, because I think I played against the same guy twice in there as well. Monk, the builds and the refinement of Control and Alter Monk just need to be refined some more. Pilfer Monk just doesn't seem playable at the moment. I think that needs to change with future card expansions, but not much can be done at the moment, I don't think. Crusader, there are a few different ways to play it, I'll give the deck that. I'm surprised I didn't see any Orc Crusader or any more dedicated. The mid-range Crusaders I played against seemed a little bit all over the place. I'm surprised where people aren't dedicating to Crusader and really trying to hammer out the builds. I think refinement is one of the things in this class really needs. People just aren't giving the time of day at the moment in the face of Battle Mage specifically. And Warrior, I really do like the token control strategy. I think if people experiment with that deck more, it might become one of the, not maybe top contenders, but definitely tier 2 material. So I expect Warrior to see a little bit of a rise, but yeah, basically not a whole lot of action from these 3 classes at the bottom, and it's sort of been like that for a while, especially with Warrior and Monk. Divine Fervor, when it was a 4-drop, Crusader was one of the top performing decks for a while, if not one of the top performing decks, at least tier 2 material, like I said, but ever since the Fervor nerf, it's sort of been down near the bottom. With that being said, those are the stats. Hopefully this offered some insight into what I played against the ladder this season. I think the meta in general is pretty healthy, as far as there's aggro decks that can compete, there are control decks that can compete, there are mid-range tempo decks that can compete, there's even some combo decks sort of weaving their way into the meta, and I think with refinement, those combo decks like Swindler's Market decks and the Alter decks can be even more well-performing, especially Token Control Archer too, it's like a combo deck. So all different kinds of decks can compete. And we're seeing a kind of healthy spread about the of the classes inside the meta. I think at this point it's just a matter of the meta sort of feeling a little bit solved, since the nerfs, we sort of experimented with the nerfs by now, and besides that, we've had the same pretty much card pool for so many months. So I think that might be the only problem, if anything. But what do you guys think? I'd love to hear your comments below about the different spread of decks. Which are you surprised to see so much of? Which are you surprised to not see much of? What do you think, maybe on this list or otherwise, are decks to watch out for moving forward? And your thoughts on the metagame in general. Hopefully you have enjoyed the analysis. Again, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Stay tuned to the channel. Subscribe if you want for future strategy videos, deck techs, stream highlights, etc. Follow the stream. I'll link it down below. And I'll see you guys next time.